Well, as I said in the course overview video, it is this piece, chapter 1 of Bertrand Russell's 1912, The Problems of Philosophy, Appearance and Reality, which in a certain respect was the inspiration for the whole course. This course really could be subtitled, as I said, Critical Reasoning or Philosophy as Critical Reasoning. And, you know, so much of, as I said, that what we do typically in critical thinking or critical reasoning courses, or what used to be called informal or practical logic courses, is very dry, very formal. And I don't think that's the best way to pursue and try to understand better the process of reasoning. Reasoning is exciting. Reasoning is interesting because the things that we want to find out through reasoning are interesting. And I think at this chapter, the opening chapter of this book, the whole book is great, but the opening chapter is just wonderful because what he's trying to do here, in a certain respect, is to show just how engaging and exciting and fun philosophical reasoning actually is, doing philosophy is. This opening paragraph is just so wonderful in terms of saying, what does it mean to do philosophy? It means to think critically about things that we usually don't think about at all, things that we take for granted. And what's really wonderful and surprising is that we see that much of what we take for granted, most of the beliefs, many of the beliefs, you might say, that we take for granted as being obvious in their truth are not obvious at all, and really rest on very shaky ground and then lead us into these paths of thinking, which are really fascinating. So, that being said, what is Russell trying to do here? I mean, what is he? What philosophical topic is he pursuing here? What philosophical question is he pursuing, and what overall point is he trying to make? Well, let me tell you this. I make a lot of videos for my online courses. I've been teaching online for a long time, way before the pandemic when everybody jumped online. And I've always made these videos, and that's part of my online teaching. And I've made hundreds and hundreds of videos on text just like this. And I feel like my job as an online teacher is really not so different from my job as an in-person teacher, and that is to help students read the text, but not to read it for them and not to tell them what it says, but to help them through some of the difficulties that might enable them to read it more profitably for themselves, to understand it better, to get more out of it. So, especially in a course like this, where what you're doing in the weekly assignment is a matter of critical reading and in examining critical reasoning, and then doing some critical reasoning of your own in terms of an evaluation, I have to, I suppose, try to walk a fine line between doing my job as a teacher in helping you to understand the text better and doing that work for you. I don't want to do that work for you. The work of the class is to read something critically, to get a sense of what the author is getting at, what their main conclusion is, and to assess how successful they are in what they are trying to get across. Just that very sort of fundamental thing in critical reasoning, where we have a claim or a set of claims, and then we have the supporting reasoning that is meant to establish the truth of those claims. And what we're doing as evaluators of argument is asking ourselves whether that supporting evidence really does prop up the main claim. And no one can do that for you. That's the whole point of the class, is to do that for yourself. But that being said, it's quite clear that this opening question, is there any knowledge in the world which is so certain that no reasonable man could doubt it, is what leads him into his subject, which is the evidence of the senses. What do our senses tell us about the world? Do they tell us anything true about the world? And, if that's the question, what his main conclusion is, well, let's see. I mean, he gives us all sorts of reasons for showing that what we took for granted about the evidence of our senses is not so simple after all. what is the color? What is something's color? It's actually a very complicated matter, what the color of something is, and I don't need to explain it because I could never do it as well as he does. What is something's shape? What is something's texture? It turns out that what Russell believes is that none of these things are simple at all, and that when we ask, let's say, what the color of a thing is, there's a certain respect in which there's no answer to that. There's no one color that something has. And what does it mean for something to have a color at all? As he says repeatedly, isn't that really not a matter of the thing itself, the thing that I assume to have a color, but really about my relation to it? That is, what do I mean when I say that something has a color? Well, I really can't take myself out of the equation, and nor can I do so when it comes to something like shape, he says. Leading to really some very interesting discussions of what my knowledge of external objects is at all, because he has this idea of the sense datum that, as it turns out, in my experience of what I take to be the physical world, I never experience it directly. I always experience some sense datum, which is not something, strictly speaking, that sense datum, something external to me, but it's an impression that I have. So maybe something internal to me. So the question of whether, as he says, what does he say? Wonderful way he puts it. Yeah, he says, thus becomes evident that the real table, sorry, I'll make this a little bigger. Sorry. Thus it becomes evident that the real table, if there is one, excuse me, that's not what he says. I gotta get it. Thus it becomes evident that the real table, if there is one, is not the same as what we immediately experience by sight or touch or hearing. The real table, if there is one, is not immediately known to us at all, but must be an inference from what is immediately known. That's a very interesting idea. The idea that what I take to be the whole world of objects, physical objects at least, matter as he calls it, is not something I ever experience directly. It's something that I infer from what I do experience directly, which is my own internal sense datum, the content of my sensations. So really, this leads us to a really fundamental question in philosophy, as he says, or two very difficult questions. Is there a real table at all? And if so, what sort of object can it be? I mean, it's just wonderful, right? Just wonderful way of leading us to these primary philosophical questions. So yeah, I mean, a lot of it is really undermining that confidence, undermining that false confidence we have in the basic assumptions of the setup of reality and our relationship with reality. I mean, maybe, what is a physical object, and how do I know they exist? And this whole thing about Berkeley, the 18th century philosopher, great 18th century philosopher Berkeley, who argued that the whole idea of matter, the whole idea of independent physical objects is self-contradictory anyway, and we only know ideas. Russell does not commit himself to anything like that, idealism, but what he calls idealism, the idea that the only things that do exist are ideas. There's no such thing as the physical as matter. He would never go so far himself, and in the book he explains why, but he doesn't think it's a ridiculous. So yeah, I mean, you could say that, I mean, when you characterize like what is Russell's main conclusion here, that's a kind of a tricky thing. It's not so direct what his main conclusion is. I think that there are probably several candidates, and one of the things that I'm encouraging you to do is to read creatively in terms of coming up with what you think is the main point of each reading. I want it to be based upon the text, obviously, but it is, after all, a matter of interpretation.